Hello, today we're going to be interviewing my dad, Peter Dean, about liberal humanism versus the rise of popular nationalist movements. Dad, what was your reaction to the 2010 Tea Party, and what do you remember their agenda being?
I remember being, I guess, outraged and upset. I remember they being very anti-government in what I consider the positive parts of government. Things like healthcare as I remember, that was one of the things they were really upset about, was government involvement in healthcare. I remember somebody's father, who was a Tea Party supporter, saying, get the government out of my Medicare, which of course is a government welfare program for the elderly, which is really saying abolish it, which was not what he meant. But that's how foolish some of their agenda seemed to be.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember anything about Occupy Wall Street?
I do. I remember one of my good friends, Annie Storr's son, I want to say Eli, but I could be wrong about his name, was very active in it, I think in the DC branch, and camped downtown for a month or more as part of it. They seemed very idealistic, and which is positive, and very anti-corporate, which is where that was the Occupy Wall Street part of it, and I felt like one of their weaknesses was they were leaderless. I mean, I think their point was to be very egalitarian, which is really positive, but when I used to run co-ops years ago, I realized there's a value to having some organization and leaders, even if they're democratic.
Yeah. What do you remember regarding the 2016 election, and in regards to the rise of popular nationalism?
Well, I think Trump rode a wave that was already there with the popular nationalism. He certainly amplified it and made it stronger and more acceptable, but it was already there from the Tea Party, and I think he really pushed the racist part of it even stronger. Not that it wasn't there, it was there. It was already a real problem. But he, in amplifying things, amplified that part in particular, which was really awful. I think at the time, I certainly felt like he was the worst possible Republican candidate. Not that I would have supported the best possible candidate in all likelihood, but he was certainly the worst, because of his really pandering, and either pandering or honest belief in the nationalism that is really reminiscent of the Nazis and other totalitarian movements.
Yeah. Do you think nationalism is a threat on human rights?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's fundamentally what it's about, is that some people should have rights and some people shouldn't. And I think that is both anti-American and anti-Christian and just wrong.
Yeah.
Immoral.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think the conflict between what is the conflict between nationalism and globalization?
Well, I think a bunch of the real conflict, the deeper conflict, is really not about nationalism versus globalization. I think it's really a I think there is a real concern about the power of corporations, which I think really is shared among many of the Trump supporters, as well as the Occupy Wall Street people. I think they look at it very differently, but I think there is, that's where the two actually agree.
Yeah.
And I think they're both right on that, to be concerned about, what is, on the one hand, globalization, is a good thing in that people can travel, people can see each other, know each other, work together, collaborate.
Yeah.
But the corporation, to the extent it's done for the corporations and against the people, it can be a really destructive force.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of what the Trump supporting nationalists, feel like, we don't want this competition from other countries, but so.
Yeah, I get that. What do you know about the rise of nationalist movements around the world, not just the United States?
Well, I think I think Russia and China are two China in particular has benefited from globalization, but in terms of corporate, they're a totalitarian state, and at its sort of pinnacle, corporate, if the corporations got what they wanted, which is monopoly power over every industry in the world, then that becomes very similar. Corporate tyranny and government tyranny are really just who's in charge.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the corporations are there yet. China is better at it. But China is only globalist in the sense that they want markets, and to buy, they want the free trade, but they do not want free travel, freedom, any of that kind of stuff. And Russia similarly, wants trade, that particularly to sell oil.
But Russia doesn't even make, they don't even make very much money to begin with.
Well, but they have a huge amount of fossil fuels.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it hasn't been too successful for them just to sell oil because.
Well, unfortunately for them, oil prices have crashed. Actually, for the first 10 or 15 years of Putin's reign, that was really what fueled him. Was oil prices were pretty good. They were selling a lot. He could buy all the military stuff he wanted and placate people with sort of, at least you're getting stability.
No, not so much.
But I think Boris Yeltsin is, not Boris Yeltsin, Boris Johnson in England, is also, the whole Brexit was a nationalist movement. We want to strengthen, Great Britain, we don't want to be part of Europe. And I think it all, I think it's it's that while there are real problems with globalization, stronger tyrannical governments are not the solution.
Yeah, and it just says it right here. Just some more examples of the national style similar to Trump are Austria, Hungary, Brazil, Turkey, Poland, India, the UK, Japan are among others, as well as many rising movements in France, Italy, Germany, Spain, and Sweden.
Right. I mean, certainly Brazil is a very good example of it's not a wealthier country, but a larger country that Bolsonaro has really, similarly ignore Corona, do what's best for me and my supporters.
But not even good for supporters.
Well, the Corona isn't really good for his supporters any more than.
Well,
than
just
Trump is.
even Trump doesn't really do what's good for his supporters the majority of the time either. Like,
True enough.
the majority
It's
of his
think
supporters
they-
are like.
Right. Although actually, if you look at the relative wealth of Trump voters versus
Oh, of course, but like. yeah.
hold on, but versus Clinton voters, they actually were wealthier.
Yeah, no. They definitely were, because the upper 1% is more likely to vote for Trump. But there are a lot of Trump supporters that are not in that position as well. So it's like,
True.
Trump doesn't do what's good, even if, like, overall they are more. They
Right.
probably are more
No.
wealthy, but that's also because probably the average gets weighed out because there's like super
what he
super
does
wealthy
that's in
people.
their is in their interest is I'm going to help white people instead of black and immigrants. In fact, I don't think it necessarily does help those people, but he's at least got policies that speak to them.
Yeah, they speak to them. They aren't like helping them the majority of the time. With manufacturing, he's like, oh, I've made all these manufacturing jobs, and it's like, nah, they're still getting lost, dude, and it's not anything you can change. It's like,
Right.
It's not your fault that they're going away. It's nobody, like, it's just that
some of it is things that could be changed. We
Yes.
could change policies that would make it less likely, but those aren't. You're right. Those
There's-
aren't the policies he's changing.
And also,
And
but
just
it's
saying-
but just companies in general. It's not I mean, policies could change that, but we have to make it a lot cheaper labor. It's just labor wise, it's so much cheaper to do it other places. Like, why would it logically make any sense? Somebody's trying to stay competitive. If a company's trying to stay competitive, they have to do it.
Right.
Well, I think
What else?
that's
we
the
got?
end of it. So,
Okay. Nice
thank
chatting
you.
with you.
Thank you for the interview, Dad.
You're welcome.